Yes, sir. This is Theology in the Dirt. Man, we're trying to practice our theology in the public square of our homes, our city, and our world. Man, you get sermon notes, links to the rest of our podcasts at theologyinthedirt.com. My name is Mitchell Jolly.
And I am Chris Hayes.
Yo, man, what's good?
Well, in 2 weeks, we no longer have to see or hear political ads. So the thought of that is good. It's hard to believe how much is spent on like just those. Right. I won't say zero impact on people's decisions, but I'm sure it has some, but it's probably very little. And I can't help but thinking, what if that money was used for like important things? Brittany voted yesterday, and then this morning said, because she was listening to her like Spotify playlist while she's in the shower, like worship music, and here comes on another Harris ad in the middle, and she goes, I just heard her say, I wish there was a button you could push after you vote that you could be automatically, exempt from political ads.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
And I was like, that button should be there always.
Yeah, right?
Oh, and go Dogs. Huge dominant win over number 1 Texas in Austin last weekend.
Heck yeah.
That was really good.
Yeah, that was freaking awesome, man. That was absolutely incredible.
What about for you?
Oh, man, what's good, man? All kinds of good stuff. I'm thankful for that Georgia win at Texas. That was just awesome. What's good also is I think even more satisfying is Kirby's post-game digs, which were absolutely incredible because he doesn't do that a lot. But the fact that everybody Georgia lost to Alabama and dropped to 5 and they put Texas number 1, just crowned Texas as the best team in the country and just like poo-pooed on Georgia, right? And it's like...
Well, Desmond Howard literally said, there's a new sheriff in town in the SEC. Yeah. I'm like, they really haven't played. They played Oklahoma was the only SEC team they played.
They played Coosa, Murchie, Georgia School for the Deaf, and nobody. I'm totally like hyperbolizing there, but they played nobody.
Broken down Oklahoma team.
Yeah, and then they just crowned them. And here's Georgia played two top 10 teams in their early part of schedule. Horrible, difficult schedule.
Hasn't lost to anyone not named Alabama in 4 years.
Right. So. Absolutely. And you got defensive linemen hurt, missing. Your Tate Ratledge and your Rome, Georgia boy, Darlington product, on the sidelines with tightrope surgery on his ankle, may be back by the Florida game, hopefully. Just injuries. And, it's horrible. Our receivers are not great. You're missing Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, something hard, because I think some of Carson Beck's struggles are Carson Beck, and some of them are receivers are not running very good routes and they're not catching balls when he hits them in the hands. And so it's not everything's Carson Beck, although it's frustrating at times. But anyway, all that to say, Kirby's dig on ESPN and then the refs, who the most god-awful thing I've ever seen. I mean, it's one thing to be a fan and – man, I get frustrated with calls and tweet about it all the time, call refs clowns. That's my favorite thing to do is tweet that the refs are clowns. But once you make a call and stand by your call, set the ball, change of possession, and the fans start throwing their beer cans onto the field and their water bottles, and you get a 10-minute delay, do not assess a penalty for it, which there should have been. And then change your mind after you have set the ball. There's no review on interference calls, and nothing. And that's just horrible, absolutely. I mean, it's terrible officiating, number one. It's just not how it works. Right. I mean, was it a bad call? Yes, it was.
Yeah.
But that's the way the ball bounces, because they also called us on pass interference in the end zone, which was not pass interference. They called us and didn't pull that flag because it was clearly good defense.
They missed one on Bell, like the drive before that too.
Absolutely. And so it's just one of those, Texas. Like, they should have overturned the one in the end zone against us, but they didn't, because they didn't have 10 minutes of being afraid of the fans. So anyway, it's just like...
We could do a whole podcast on the targeting rule, but we won't get into that either.
Oh, yeah. But what's good is that did not deter Georgia from dominating, and that was awesome to watch.
The drive right after that touchdown that made it what, an 8-point lead?
100%.
Was it 3 plays, and they were like 60, 70 yards down the field.
Yeah, Bobo got in his bag on that flea flicker, and I was nice. Like, oh.
The same play Texas ran earlier, and they got nothing.
It's beautiful. So what's good?
Yeah.
That was stinking good, and that makes it time to shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
Shake and bake. Shake and then
bake. Shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
It's shake and bake time. Shake and bake, buddy. Shake it before you bake it.
Absolutely. It's shake and bake time. And guess what? We are just 13 days out from the election. And so we kind of figured things are hot right now. This would be a really good time for us to talk about the election. And so we're going to do that because we have, in election season, we started this year dealing with the election cycle. And who knows what's going to happen between now and the actual election. We may have to come back and talk about, because it's been, oh my gosh, I don't think it's been more polarized, and never before in the history of my life. And I'm not going to say ever. I don't want to be like Trump and say never before in the history of the world this has ever happened. I'm the greatest, the best there ever is, the best ever. I don't. The absolute best. It's huge. It's going to be huge. No, but 2 assassination attempts on one former presidential candidate. And, I mean, if that's not an indication of the polarization, but also something else that's sitting there. How? There's just so many things. So who knows what could happen between now and the actual election. I never dreamed it would be like this. And so it's super intriguing. I'm totally intrigued by it, but also I'm intrigued by people's response, because we've seen this for a while as I think our presidential candidates have become more and more polarized, and we've seen a seismic shift in ideology of parties, and then the weaponization of media, particularly by one who really owns the media, and pretty much the media, by and large, mainstream media, is a puppet of the Democrat Party. Let's just be honest. Where we are stuck in this place of what in the world do we do? And it seems like there are multiple camps. There are evangelicals for Harris, which I'm going to say something about that at the end. There are I would say former, they call themselves evangelicals, and I don't believe they are. I don't know what the heck they are, who are saying they're going to vote for Harris Waltz to preserve conservatism. And I'm going, that's like me saying I'm going to save you from cancer by taking your smokes from you and smoking them myself. Like, okay, really? And so I'm like, oh gosh, that one's I'm about to that bothers me. And then you got folks who are just uncritical of the other side at all. Just puppets in the opposite direction. They're GOP lackeys regardless of what the GOP does, and the GOP's got some problems. But and then you got folks who say that the proper thing and the right thing to do is, and maybe they're not saying it's the right thing to do, but they're saying they're not going to vote. Mm-hmm. They're not going to vote because they don't like either candidate. And Christians, what's wild and blowing my mind is the voting block of Christians, the number of Christians who will not vote is mind-blowing to me. And I think, I want to say here this, I think that is an absolute travesty. When you have a Christian who refuses to vote, it's one thing if our options were Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx. If we had to choose between Engels and Marx, that might be maybe the option is start a revolution at that point. But we don't have that option, and so it leads to this idea. And I think there's I hear this a lot, and I've heard it for the last few election cycles, and Christians use this as an excuse to not vote. And I know you're going to talk to this, so I don't want to get too far into it myself, because I'm sure I'll have some thoughts as you speak to it. But the idea of the lesser of two evils, right? So we're having to choose between the lesser of two evils. And what I want to say is I don't think that's a valid argument. Mm-hmm. And here's why I say it's not a valid argument. It is, number one, assuming that both sides are evil. And I think categorically, we're talking philosophically, categorically, when you look at Harris Waltz, Trump Vance, am I satisfied with the shift to the middle on abortion issues of the GOP? Absolutely not. And IVF also. We've done a podcast on that. Absolutely not satisfied with that. Not happy about that at all. However, at least on that side, there is access to speaking truth to power, and there is the general idea that this is not good. This is not what we want, but we're going to err on the side of pulling in people from the left who are more moderate to try to defeat something else. And over here on this side is a stated Marxist economic ideology and the flat out abortion up to and through birth. Those are not the same.
Right.
They are categorically not the same thing. And so, therefore, this is not the lesser of two evils. This is one that has clearly got a godless ideology and one who has a sense of, I don't even know what I want to call it. It's not godlessness. It's an ideology I don't like. It's an idea I don't like, but nonetheless welcomes me in to speak to it and speak about it with the option of, and I'm going to get some examples here in a minute. So I don't want people to make the lesser of two evils argument. And therefore, since I'm having to make a lesser of two evils, I'm just not going to choose. I don't want to do that. So, and just a little comfort here, and I want to encourage people with this before we kind of get down into some of the weeds, because I think the stuff we're going to talk about and we have talked about is easy for me and others, and maybe like me, we can maybe tend toward despair. Like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if? Or this is a situation we find ourselves in. Thomas Watson, sort of a loose quotation, is we too often focus on the one who brings our troubles to us rather than the one who sent our troubles to us. Mm-hmm. God's sovereign hand lies behind absolutely all of this, and he is altogether 100% good. And he's not just a sovereign force, but he is the sovereign Father. And so I believe that regardless of what God chooses to give us here, if he chooses to give us Harris Waltz, it may be difficult and hard, and we may see a season of God's displeasure for things. Nations experience favor and displeasure at the hand of God. Sometimes judgment for sin, as Isaiah said, sometimes just because it's a season of discomfort to work God's sovereign purposes for good. Or God could give us Trump Vance, which I think would give us better options. But either way, God is the one who ultimately will determine who is president, vice president. And so as Christians, we can trust that God's working for our good,
right,
regardless of what he takes us through. And so let me give you some examples. Now, for example, there is a direct quote from Tim Walsh's education appointee in Minnesota. Because I'm just give you some examples of why I think there is a particular, the Harris Waltz ticket is not an option for Christians. I'm just going to say it. It should not be an option for Christians. Here's an example. The Tim Walsh's education appointee in Minnesota says you can't be a critical race theorist and be pro-USA. CRT is an anti-state theory that says the U.S. needs to be deconstructed. Now, ask yourself a question. Who's a threat to our democracy? Because what this side is saying is Trump's a threat to democracy, but he's already been president for 4 years. Mm-hmm. He didn't threaten our democracy. My gas wasn't as expensive as it is now. Groceries weren't as expensive as they are now. We still had, he successfully got rid of Roe v. Wade. And Harris and Waltz are going, we need to deconstruct our country. They're anti-constitutional bias. And again, we don't worship the Constitution. The Bible is our authority. But we also find in the Constitution some alignment with what our Bible teaches. And here is a ticket saying that needs to be deconstructed. I have a problem with that. When it comes to the pro-abortion movement that Harris and Waltz trumpets, it's based on the idea of restricting the reach of the law's protection of human dignity. How much more depraved is it then when progressive Christians, and this is a problem I have, are found doing the same thing by questioning whether ensoulment would justify killing unborn children? That was a debate that went on a few months ago of ensoulment. So when does ensoulment happen? So as long as we can come up with this idea of ensoulment happening at a certain point, it's okay to kill the baby up to that point. And then they applaud themselves as being the ones really pursuing justice. That's absolute evil.
Oh yeah.
Absolute evil. Because there's a number one, we may even need to do a podcast on that at some point, because there's a clear biblical teaching and captured in Christian history about the dignity from conception all the way to the end of life, about the immaterial nature, man, which affects how we approach IVF also. And again, we've done a podcast on that.
Well, then you throw in like the language and let's just call it propaganda of rewording what it is to make it sound like it's a heroic thing. Like we are heroes for these women,
right?
Telling me that I don't have a say-so because I'm a man. Well, you can't even define what a woman and a man is to begin with. So how does that? And then again, we ignore any kind of father figure in those instances, which I know is not always there. So it's just, it's the constant reshaping of language in order to try to make it as a positive thing, as a heroic thing, that drives me crazy as well.
100%. And I want to say this: I am not only pro-life, I am anti-abortion. And I know people may take issue with that, and that's fine. People can take all the issue with that they want. I've never met a mama who didn't want to give that baby the absolute most opportunity she possibly could, at the cost of her own life if necessary. I know people, I know individuals, and I didn't get permission to share names, so I'm not going to share names, who are successful men and women whose moms chose to have them after they were raped. I'm not telling anybody that's pleasant. It's not right that a woman would be treated that way, but it's also not right to kill the baby either. And so is it pleasant? Is it ideal? No, it's not ideal that would happen to a woman in the first place. But killing the baby is not the answer. And this tiny percentage, people always throw, what about these medical procedures that are necessary? They are less than 1%. Less than 1%. In fact, the Harris Waltz campaign keeps throwing out this example in Georgia where the mama died because she needed an abortion. What they're not telling you is she died because of a botched abortion attempt. That's a fact. You can go look that up. And what they're doing is intentionally manipulating the story to make you think she needed an abortion. She was afraid, and the doctors were afraid because of Georgia's anti-abortion policies. It is not freaking true. And I'm being very careful because I want to say she was given a chemical abortion procedure. It was botched, and she died as a result of the abortion procedure. That's reality. Mm-hmm. And so what they're doing is lying to you because they're playing this my body, my choice stuff. They didn't care about that when it came to COVID vaccine, but nonetheless, when it comes to a baby, let's kill the baby. And so this hypocrisy is crazy. And just to be clear about, even the GOP side, and I've already voted, and I'm not afraid to tell anybody I did vote Trump Vance. I did not vote, and I didn't vote third party because I think right here at this point, there is a clear inflection point that matters. And what matters is the preservation of some things and the possibility of preserving some other things that we won't get if the other party wins. And so, but this is a critique. I think the IVF issue that they are trumpeting is a problem for us Christians, because that's a pro-life issue, and it comes off as pro-life, but it's not pro-life in that there's the destruction of embryos. And now even the genetic engineering of embryos, which takes us back to some deep, deep, deep issues. But the softening of the GOP's stance on pro-life issues is an absolute problem. Absolute problem. Trump is wrong. The GOP is wrong. And however, should Trump win, social conservatives are going to have to fight him tooth and nail to help him claim a victory, and I intend to do that. We're going to continue this work here, and Lord willing, fight to bring a more robust pro-life ethic back to a party that has begun to shift. But it's going to be an opportunity for us to speak up. If the other team wins, they have made it clear not only will we not have a voice, but they intend. In fact, in 2020, Kamala Harris, part of her primary promise was repealing of the Hyde Amendment. If people don't know what the Hyde Amendment is, that is that the federal government, federal monies are not permitted to be spent and used for abortion. And the reason and I'll just go ahead and say that's, for me, an issue worth taking up arms for. Federal monies means your tax dollars and my tax dollars would go to fund abortions, meaning we as Christians are funding abortions. You better not be repealing Hyde Amendment. There's going to be some shifting. We're going to go Corey ten Boom here on people as far as like, you're going to get my tax dollars, and it's already to that place. Why should the government sequester our tax dollars to pay for an education system that back ends our worldview with content contrary to our worldview? So we as Christians are paying for an education system that's out of control, paying for things we don't agree with. That's already a problem. But you take the Hyde Amendment and repeal it, we got issues. And so Harris Waltz, she ran on that platform of repealing the Hyde Amendment to use federal monies for abortion. And so I'm just saying here, this isn't the lesser of two evils. We don't have equivalent issues here. We have one that says we value these things constitutionally and as a society, as a worldview, and one that says we value the exact opposite. And I would say for Christians, that choice is fairly clear. Final thing I'll say here is fellow pro-lifers thinking of withholding their vote from Trump over his backsliding on abortion need to go and watch some clips of Kamala Harris, not hard to find on YouTube. And this is an interview she just did the other day on not believing in any religious exemption for abortion. And they need to think hard about the unwisdom of that plan. Trump is weakening the GOP stance on abortion, and Kamala, though, is hardening the Democrat position and sharpening their teeth to go at people like us. And so, again, the promise to appeal the Hyde Amendment is a problem. So I be very clear, I don't believe a Christian should, with a good conscience, vote for Harris Waltz at all. And I think they need to go vote. And if Christians who traditionally, and even outdoorsmen, like people I like outdoorsmen don't vote, which blow my mind. Mm-hmm. Huge swaths, I'm talking millions of the demographic of outdoorsmen and Christians don't vote. That's a problem. But we'll complain. We'll complain with regulation on hunting and then complain about issues of non-Christian influence in the political system, but we don't vote. So I would say Christians need to vote, and I think they don't need to vote Harris Waltz.
I mean, Waltz is a hunter, right? We saw the video.
Oh, he's really good. Yes. Yes.
How do I use this thing?
That was so embarrassing. I feel bad for the guy sometimes. I'm like,
But then you don't, because you're like, no, you chose to do that.
True. Yeah, he did. He did. At least practice. The night before, like spend some time, some hours, trying to put shells in that shotgun. Trying to bird hunt. He's not a bird hunter. It's really embarrassing at times. Which, by the way, I mean, I told you who I voted for, but I watched a couple of clips early this morning on Vance was on Theo. I think Theo Von's funny. I know he's profane and he advocates for things we don't advocate for, but I'm impressed. He's a deep person. Like, he thinks deeply about issues, and he has really good guests on his podcast. But he had J.D. Vance on, and Vance couldn't stop laughing, which I found funny, because Vance is a normal dude. I mean, if you read Hillbilly Elegy, fascinating read. It's a great book. People ought to go read it.
He's by far the most normal out of the four people in the race.
Yes, he is a completely normal dude. And a Marine, right? And he wasn't a door kicker. He was
real Marine.
He was an actual Marine who went into combat zone in Baghdad, and he's funny. Like, him laughing at Theo Von, and Theo Von can be funny at times. It was refreshing because he is a normal dude.
Yeah.
Raised in poverty, raised by his grandmother, mama getting over addiction, went to high school, went to college. Well, he went to college after he served in the Marine Corps on the GI Bill. And he's just a normal dude. And it was nice to see a normal dude laughing at stuff I would laugh at too, and not awkwardly.
It reminds me a little bit of Vivek Ramaswamy in that, like, he just doesn't dodge. He doesn't dodge questions.
Yeah.
He doesn't answer them with a bunch of politicians speak. I'm sure. Right. I mean, there's some in there sometimes, more so just to dodge dumb questions that are intended to try to mess it up.
Sure.
But he just answers them genuinely and calls things out, and which is why they don't like him on the left.
That's right.
Or a lot of people in Washington. But.
That's right. And let me say, if you're a person listens to this and you listen to this with your children, don't go pull up Theo Von's podcast. and say, Mitch said this was a good podcast. Do not go listen to Theo Vaughn's podcast. I'm a grown man.
Theo Vaughn, former road ruler from MTV days and The Challenge.
Yeah. He's been in the cult. He's got a great story, but he doesn't live up to his story. He's got a great story of getting out of addiction, but he says foul things at times, and he's interesting too on a faith journey, because I think there's a thing happening to him which I also find fascinating in the public at large, from Sean Ryan to Joe Rogan, various people in that world, that they are being exposed somehow. I mean, there's a dude the other day on Sean Ryan podcast. He was one of Trump's communications directors. Alabama native, had a Yellowhammer Media was his little company. Trump brought him in. It's a great story. But this dude, the number one podcast in the world, Sean Ryan Show, just drops the gospel bomb all over the place, because he's not dirty, not foul, follows Jesus, honest about his struggles with power when he gets to Washington, but man, just gospel. And it's like number one podcast in the world, people hearing the cross of Jesus Christ. And it's through those things that's led Sean Ryan to faith in Christ. It's those things that have led people like Russell Brand to faith in Christ. Joe Rogan starting to recognize, man, maybe we need Jesus. I'm like, yes, you do, Joe. And so what I find fascinating is, and Theo Vaughn's on this little bit of a journey. Like, he has people on talk about Jesus, and he's intrigued. Mm-hmm. All that to say is, I don't want people to go listen to Vaughn and think I advocate for everything he says, but I do think it's neat for us when we're in the public square to pay attention where the Lord's at work. Mm-hmm. And the Lord's at work in people starting to recognize that there is a distinction. Even in pagans see the difference between Harris Vance or Harris Waltz, Trump Vance. And so if pagans can see that, or people who are just new in the faith, what is our problem that we won't vote and put, I don't know, red herring arguments up?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. And so I just want to encourage Christians, hey, go vote. And I think you need to vote. I think you need to vote Trump Vance. And probably get nasty texts and phone calls, but that's okay.
Probably so.
But I'm saying if you're voting Harris Waltz, you probably don't need to be texting, calling me anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. Don't freaking do that. So.
Yeah.
Theology in the Dirt podcast just died.
Felt like we just ended there. Got canceled.
I felt the podcast will probably never record.
I guess I can say whatever I want to now. No.
Get after it.
This whole thing is there's an eerie similarity to the 2016 election between Hillary Clinton and Trump. You have basically half the country was anti-Trump, never Trump under any circumstance, even if they completely disagree with Clinton's politics and nature.
Yeah.
The other half was pretty much opposite, saying Clinton is way worse than Trump, and that Trump wasn't necessarily good, but him winning would be better for the country. And it feels very much the same. True. Although I think Harris is even farther left than Clinton, which is scary and odd. But there were some polls that were thrown around during that time where between 25 and 30% of Americans had negative views of both candidates, which feels really high for two people running for the most prestigious office in the world. And I bet you that percentage is higher if they ran that same poll now.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's enough percentage of the country that says, I don't like either of you. I think that's okay. I don't think we should look at either of them and be like, man, what a candidate, what a person, what a human being.
Right.
But and I think that's where we get to the lesser of two evils approach.
Sure.
If I'm being honest, I that's probably a big part of the approach I took in 2016, voting for Trump over Clinton. I don't think that was a driving force, but that was certainly a rhetoric I had used. Like, well, he's not as bad as her, or him being president would not be as bad as her becoming president.
Right.
So just being honest there. And I think so. And then the word we use for that is consequentialism. And I would say the majority of Americans are probably consequentialists in some shape or fashion. So the simplest version of that says an act is good if it brings the greatest good or the least harm to the greatest number of people. Yeah. That's kind of if we're putting a definition on consequentialism. If we look at Proverbs, for example, the Bible has concern for consequences. Yeah. Proverbs 3:1-12 insists that those who trust and fear the Lord will see that he makes their path straight. In other words, obedience normally leads to good consequences, and bad decisions lead to trouble. But in biblical ethics, taking Scripture as a whole, obedience to God's moral law and the pursuit of godly character are far more prominent than just the calculation of consequences. So for me, like when it comes to voting, I think there's two major problems with consequentialism, or as we've said, the lesser of two evil approach. First, no human can predict or fully assess the consequence of any action. So full assessment requires omniscience, which is an attribute of God, not man.
We don't have that.
We don't have that ability. And the second, consequentialism tends to decay into lawlessness when people do whatever it takes to achieve their desired result. And I think that we would argue that's not a good thing either.
Right.
That's when things like riots happen, or and more, and there's just a lot of things that happen when we do that. So I say that because I think that's where we've been really probably for the last 3 elections.
Yeah.
And if we took a poll of people who were voting and using that rhetoric, it would be a lot. I just think that's where we've been in America's. And part of that's not because of people innately being that way. We've been kind of forced into that way because of the divisiveness of the candidates and the two-party system, which continue to pull farther and farther apart. So it's like, okay, we've got to be so far different. And it started with that. GOP was trying to go so far away from what Obama was and what Hillary Clinton was. So let's go to a polarizing candidate. Because they knew, we knew that, like, we put people like Mitt Romney in there who really had little chance at winning.
Right.
Who was a Mormon, and a lot of Christians voted for him, saying, he kind of aligns with our political. It's just
vote for a guy who's in a cult,
right.
that versus a guy who's, questionable about whatever his faith is. Right.
Right.
It's interesting because it's almost like, well, not almost like, it kind of is this place where at least Trump. The dynamic of the Trump campaign is at least offers a possibility of a neutral world, because you talk about they got so far polarized. The Trump-Vance campaign seems to be coming back to try to offer some sense of middle neutrality, whereas the Harris-Walz campaign is working in the negative. Like they are intentionally they're playing to the far, far, far left, to the point that you got Tulsi Gabbard actually converted yesterday, became an actual Republican. Now, Tulsi is not a Republican under the way I understand small government, social conservatism. She is not that. I like Tulsi, but she's not a Republican. Right. So that's the shift. At least, the polarization you're talking about, at least what Trump Vance is trying to do is come back to that middle, although it's too far middle for my liking necessarily, but it's at least offering neutrality, whereas Harris-Walz is in the negative, man, completely staying out on the fringes.
Right. Well, like you said earlier, we have 4 years of Trump in office. Wasn't perfect, but did a lot of things. I think the biggest thing about his time is he ran the country more like a business than as like a politician.
Sure.
That was one of the most appealing things about him.
True.
As opposed to Hillary Clinton at the time, who was, a political politician-y, if you will,
right.
As it gets. And but the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around with Harris is that everything she's speaking on her campaign trail is opposite of what her and Biden have done the last 4 years. And so I'm I'm tired of hearing about her desire for the middle class and wanting to cut, raise wages and cut prices and go after these people who are making it. I'm like, no, you made the prices higher. Not just you, but anyone thinking that this was all Biden and not her the last 4 years.
Sure.
Got some land to sell you.
Right.
It's just not true.
Yeah.
But knowing that that's a big sticking point for America. So the Harris approach of trying to be all things to all people is it's car salesman-y. It's really, really icky.
Yeah.
And that's not even none of this has anything to do with Christian stuff.
Yeah.
It's just
sure. I'm not even sure she's trying to be all
platform.
things to all people as much as she is trying to be a legitimate cultural, social, and economic Marxist to the fringe of our political spectrum, and is happy to be such. Like we've already covered that, where we define Marxism. Like I told you, I don't want to throw rocks without proving that the rock ought to be thrown. So we defined Marxism and gave some examples of Marxist ideology. Like I think she's just appealing. She is a Marxist, culturally, socially, and economically. And she is okay with appealing to that. And what's wild is even Obama, the most racist thing could be said was him calling out black men for not being willing to vote for a woman. And I'm going, based on what?
Right.
Like, come on. The division started with Obama sending mailers. I got one in my mailbox when he was president about this kind of stuff. Is drawing these distinct lines, and now he's appealing. And what's interesting is black men are rebelling against that, going, wait a second, whatever happened to the fact that my rent in my shop just went up 1,000%? I'm not voting because she's a woman or she thinks she's black. I'm voting because I need to survive in my business.
Right.
Good. Yes. Thank you. It's not an issue of race. It's not an issue of gender. It's an issue of ideology.
Yeah.
But that's what she is trying to. She understands its ideology, and of course, Obama campaigning, stumping for her is trying to make it. He's trying to shame people into voting for her. Well, they know they're losing.
Right. Well, and then she's. I mean, it's a smart strategy because she's taking the box of Marxism that she stands on.
Yeah.
And she's painting it with conservative paint.
Yeah,
it's exactly what it's like. You, Tommy Boy, when the guy's like, "I need on the box the guarantee on the box." He's like, "Well, I can guarantee a piece of.
I can take a poop in a box and
guarantee it." And that was on the other night. And that's all I could think of was this is Harris ideology
peace.
But that's exactly what's happening, though. It's like, yeah, you know what? Your prices are high. Well, we're going to deconstruct the government and make it all better by lowering your prices, and we're going to give you money we're going to build more homes so that the houses don't cost as much. Mm-hmm. What we're leaving out is how we're going to do that.
Yeah. Well, price controls lead to shortages because price controls don't affect cost of people producing what you're trying to control the price on, which is how you create bread lines in the Soviet Union. Yeah. I mean, I got a minor in that stuff. Like, I actually have a degree. Have an associates of science in business and economics. That's how I was able to get out of. That's how I was able to. I'm proud of that little degree. It's the hardest thing I've ever earned because I had overcome dyslexia, not being able to read, and learning to actually write a 5-paragraph essay by hand before we had like word processors. Yeah. And so I'm proud of that little associate's degree because it taught me how to be a student, and then I was able to go on and get a bachelor's degree and get a master's degree, but. I learned something about economics from Thomas Berry, who's a bank executive in the Berry family here. And I learned economics from Thomas Berry, and it was brilliant. And I learned some amazing things. And so it's like once you listen and know those things and pay attention to them, you can't help but recognize economic Marxism. It's just there. And it's become a philosophy in our republic, and it's a problem even on both sides. Like that, some of the inflation is due to W spent more than he should have. Even Trump in his first administration, and I think he recognizes some of these things, which I also want to give him a second shot, is you can't print money. You have to stop printing money. You cannot control the market artificially. You have to release the market. That's the principle. That's why it's called supposedly a free market. You have to release the market, stop controlling it, stop printing money. So some of that is the fault of the federal government keeping on printing money. It's a problem. And so Harris Waltz is all on that train. Anyway, sorry, I got down a rabbit hole. When you talked about the polarization, I'm like, neutral versus staying far left, and that far left is dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's just it's hard because it's, you know how we talk about having like tip fatigue these days. Mm-hmm. I think we have maybe not voter fatigue. We have political fatigue, and I think that's understandable. I think that's probably why. Because I'll be honest, I'm tired of feeling like I need to put a disclaimer up before I say who I'm going to vote for, or having to apologize. I'm not saying I do that, but it feels that way. It feels like I'm not big on going around telling everybody who I'm going to vote for, but I'm not ashamed of it either. Yeah. But having to be like, well, I don't really want to vote for him.
You know what? I think I'm not tired of the political stuff because I'm fascinated by this. Right. I actually kind of love it. I am tired of having to pretend like I'm a little more neutral than I am. And I think in evangelicalism, there's a movement of people that's more Gnostic than they are actual putting some practice to their theology, and that is it's just spiritual. So our task is to just pray. Yes, fast. And we have to live in the public square and make decisions that matter. And so I think there is a twinge of Gnosticism that has crept into our evangelical practical theology. And maybe it's some of our eschatology. Maybe it's showing our eschatology is a little more Gnostic or a little less practical than it ought to be. But I'm kind of tired of pretending like I'm in that just pray. Like, yes, pray. We do pray, and go do something. Because Corrie ten Boom couldn't just pray. Mm-hmm. We're about to do a biography on Corrie ten Boom. Corrie ten Boom had to decide to lie. When she turned her radio in, they had two. She had to decide, I'm going to lie to this German officer about having two radios. And she remarked at how easy it was for her to lie. She'd never done that before. And all of a sudden, she's like, that was very easy. And she had to get good ethically with lying and stealing and denying in order to keep Jews from dying. And I'm going, it's okay to say, you know what, no, my theology leads me to make some decisions here. And these decisions draw some neat lines. Sometimes they're not neat, but sometimes I have to make a decision to save this. I've got to let this go. And I think the whole idea, just pray and don't say anything and don't tip your hand. And you want the left to come in. Yeah, I do, but I want them to come into something that matters. Yeah. Not just something that's neutral. And so, anyway, yeah, that's what I'm tired of. I think my fatigue is having to pretend like I don't have an ideology that works itself out practically, and I've kind of dropped that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump in. We got
I'm robbing all your time. You can tell I'm opinionated.
That's cool. I'll just shut this down and call it a day. No, it's all good stuff, and it's a good discussion. It's an important discussion. But I want to jump into like the thought of not voting at all, and if that's a legitimate option for Christians. I think we have opinions on that. And I think part of it here is that we don't have anything specific in Scripture about voting. Right. I don't necessarily think it's unchristian to not vote, but I do think we are called to do good, to care for our country, our communities, and our way of life. So we bless our communities with gospel words, with good deeds. That's the implication of 1 Peter 2. Christians do not want to be part of life-ruining problems of society. We want to be part of life-bettering solutions. We don't want police to be unjust or unhelpful. We don't want leaders to be corrupt, but to have integrity. We don't want the infrastructures of water and sewer, electricity and gas and roads, bridges, etc., supplies. We don't want those things to fail. So we're willing to pay for them and do our part to keep things functioning for good, which we would call the common good of as many people as possible within the scope of the truth and what Scripture tells us. We want to be a part of helping homelessness and poverty and drug addiction and safe neighborhoods, good schools, all these things, economic stability, which is why I think Peter, a couple times in this text, says we're to be busy doing good deeds so as to silence those who say Christianity is not good for the world, and also to make God look glorious, to make him look better and make him more famous. And so we're not sitting buried away in our caves, indifferent to what's going on, to the suffering or the needs of our society, which is what it feels like if we take the position of not voting at all or just writing in like your dad's name, And it's hard because I think there are people who are really struggling. And yes, you can write in a candidate you feel who is worthy of office, even if they have zero chance of getting elected. It's your right to do that. Yeah. These last few elections have been really difficult because of the candidates we've had, and the fact, again, we have a two-party system that will continue to go wider and further apart. So for me personally, I think voting is a gift and it's a privilege that we as Christians need to be involved in the public square in this way, should go out of our way to give our vote after seeking wise counsel from the Lord and his word, and then using discernment to cast our votes. I didn't know you. So again, it's one of those things. Yes, if you choose not to vote, that's your right to, but we are saying that's not the right way to go about it from what we've been called to do and to care for and to be stewards of those things around us. One practical way we can do those things that a lot of the New Testament talks about when it comes to doing good is casting a vote to try to better our society and our communities around us.
I definitely 100% agree with that. And right now, because I'm so buried up in Corrie ten Boom, I think about those Christians who, when begged to take, this one particular instance, begged to take a child and her mama, newborn, that was premature, and they were full, and they begged a Dutch Reformed pastor who lived in the country to take this child, and his response was, "I can't because it would endanger myself." And I'm going, I got to listen to that come into my mind as I'm reading that and going, and I don't want to morally equate the two. I'm not trying to do that. So a person who chooses not to vote, don't feel me accusing you of doing the same thing, because that mom and that baby ended up being drug away and killed. And so what I am saying, though, is there has to be a place where there's some clear moral rights and wrongs, and we have a chance to stand on something that's right. A failure to do so is a moral wrong. Mm-hmm. So if we think we're staying out of the fray and being neutral is doing good, in some instances it's actually doing harm.
Yeah.
And so I think we've got to be really, like I said at the beginning, if it's Friedrich Engels, Marxist economic ideas, and Karl Marx, if those are our two options, then no, I'm not going to vote for either one. I'm going to start a revolution. But I'm going to do something. I think doing nothing it's rare that doing nothing is the answer.
You ever seen Brewster's Millions?
No,
back in the day. It's was it Richard Pryor, John Candy.
Richard Pryor.
His grandfather or something leaves him like millions and millions of dollars, but he has to spend a certain amount without keeping anything. So he can't spend it and keep things.
Okay.
In like a certain amount of days for him to get the bigger. I think he has to spend like $30 million in order to get $300 million.
Okay.
And so part of he ends up running for office. But the whole thing of his office is none of the above. Not to vote for him, but vote for nobody.
Really?
And I can't help but thinking those campaign banners that say none of the above when I think about this. Because I say that jokingly because, again, I don't support that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's going to step on some toes. I feel like in this election in particular, it's a cop-out. Yeah. It's a way for believers to just, wring our hands of blood and say, I didn't vote for either. So whatever happens is not on me. And that's I'll say I can understand that thought process, but I can't support that decision because I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up and get to Hayes takeaways, and you may have more, and so if you do, let me know. But I just have a question. I just want to hear your thoughts on the constant pandering to Christians by both candidates and the vast differences Christians are taking to support both candidates. So to set that up a little bit, in a matter of like 2 days, we had Kamala Harris telling Christians at her rally who yelled Jesus is Lord that they were at the wrong rally, laughed at them and mocked them publicly. There was more going on there, but still that happened. Yep. And then the next day she's at a church, which ironically was just a few miles from my parents' house and where I grew up, acting like church-going woman, and we're a woman of God, and pandering to the Christian community. And then, but on the other hand, we have Trump appealing to Christians, welcoming all who believe in Jesus, while many of his actions and words being very far from that, and certainly not living a lifestyle that would be something we would support. So, it's the combination of them pandering to, and then pandering may be the wrong word, but politicking specifically to Christians and to the church, but also the churches using political parties or candidates as something to rally around, which feels like it's almost idolic. Does that make sense?
I think there is a boatload of difference between allowing a candidate up onto the stage to have a stump speech where there should be a sermon. Number one, I won't even do this kind of stuff we're doing now on a Sunday morning, not because I don't believe it, but because I believe that's a holy time in which we open the Bible and teach God's word, because nothing that we've said today is going to save a person from hell.
Right.
There's no power of the gospel to take a dead heart and replace it with a new heart in anything we've said today. But I think it is an outworking of a heart that's new, trying to make sense of my world and do the best possible good I possibly can. Mm-hmm. So we want to say it. But I would never let Trump or Harris stand in front of our fellowship and do a stump speech, because they would just say, I know how that works. They're not going to do it because there's no power in it to save people who show up that day or save people saved. So I won't even do this on Sunday mornings. You know that, we know that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to preach from the Bible, and I'm going to offer salvation, and I'm going to offer the word to people. And anybody who preaches in our church, that's the mandate. That's what you do. You preach the Bible. And so there's a world of difference, and I say that to say there's a world of difference what happened in 2020 when David Platt allowed Trump on the stage to just pray for him. And he prayed for him, and people just bashed him for, in an evangelical church, letting Trump up on the stage. He didn't preach. He didn't stump speech. He prayed for him. And then what happened with Kamala Harris, where she got to give her stump speech from the stage. Now, that has happened in cases where Trump got to get up on the stage in a church. So I would say it's normal for candidates to try to pander to a voting bloc. That's what they do. So I'm expecting that. What I do believe and expect is leadership in those congregations to have a boundary to say, I'm going to be careful what I say. I almost said something that's not appropriate. but to just say no. No. If you want to come in here and sit and hear the word preached, you can come sit here and I will preach to you. I will open the Bible.
You're welcome to attend.
Yeah, you're welcome to attend this service and meet people, but you're going to hear from me or whoever's preaching that day from God's word, truth to power. Yeah. It's prophetic, but you ain't getting up here and trying to convince anybody. That's just not going to happen. I don't care what side you're on. Now, if you would like us to pray for you, I will pray for you. Glad to do. We'll gather around you. This whole body will gather around and pray for you. We'll pray for Harris. If Harris wanted to come in, we will pray for you, that God will be gracious and kind to you and be merciful to you and bless you and your family. We'll pray for you, but you ain't speaking. And you sure as heck ain't going to open the Bible and pretend like you know what it says. You're just not going to let that happen. So I expect them to always pander.
Right.
What I expect is for congregations to have some standards. So as much as we're like, I think you ought to vote for this one and you ought to get out and vote, they're not walking up in the church and pandering to us. I'm not going to let that happen.
No, you can't take a pulpit that's meant to make much of Jesus and use it to make much of a person, much less a political candidate.
And I even tweeted out, I think I tweeted out or I shared with some people, there's a church in Virginia whose pastor did, and he said all the right stuff. I agree with 100% everything he said. I was like, yes, he said it right. But he said it on a Sunday morning during sermon time. And what I would say is that's not where you do that. That's what these things are, a podcast is for. But he said all the stuff. And I agree with it. And he even justified it by appealing in American history to a history during the Revolution and other times of political sermons. And just because there's a history of political sermons in our country doesn't mean that's justification for giving political sermons. So although I agree with 100% of what he said, I disagreed with his method of doing it on Sunday morning in a worship service. And so I expect him to pander. I don't expect us to pander.
Right.
We trumpet and preach one message, and that's Jesus Christ and him crucified. And that message, though, gives us a worldview. And we have to fight. It's theology in the dirt. It's like, how do we take that worldview and do something with it? And that's what we're trying to work out. And people may not agree with that. That's fine. They have the freedom in the United States of America to go disagree. But by all means, work it out. And find out whether or not you're working something out that's significant. Like Paul said, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. We're trying to do that. And so we don't come on here flippantly. We come on here very carefully, try to be measured, and work what the Bible says out in all the ways we possibly can in the public square.
Yeah.
So that's, sorry, it's a long answer to your question.
No, it was a long answered question, but I just wanted to get your take on that because I think that's important to address.
Let me. So I think one of the things God's doing in us right now is teaching us how to be detailed and specific in our presence in the public square. I think part of the challenge we have is we've been so absent from the public square for so long. And what I mean, even in you will remember this, you're old enough, but the moral majority sort of political movement, the Jerry Falwell moral majority, sort of the retaking of conservatism in the political spectrum, although it had very good parts to it. I think what that did was still isolate the church to the margins of society, and we just became a political voting bloc at that point. Mm-hmm. But I think what's happening now is as Christians engage the public square, as they are actually in multi-faith settings and they are in policy making and doing the things that happen in this building, we're forced back into that place where we have to think in detail, and it's not acceptable for us to throw platitudes around. Yeah. Because platitudes don't create policy, and platitudes don't govern a people well. And if we're called to disciple the nations, some of that looks like vocationally, us being in places where platitudes don't work. We have to create policy. Mm. We have to create things that matter. It's systemic. I even shared with some guys this morning some basic articles on thinking systemically about bringing and leading change. And that's very detailed and granular. We haven't had to think intellectually about systemic change from a Christian worldview. Because we've been absent from it. Mm-hmm. And so I think what's happening is we are forced back into a place where we have to go, if this is our worldview, then it's not appropriate to just sit back and throw colloquial platitudinal phrases out. We have to get down in the dirt and go, if this is true, then this is true. And if this is true, then it has these implications and they mean X, Y, and Z. We just haven't had to do that, and now we are. And I think it's separating the wheat from the chaff to some degree.
Yeah, we need more people going out in the public square who are better armed with the knowledge of the word, as opposed to the ones speaking out who have nothing to back it up with. I think that's been a problem.
Yeah, and critical thinking skills, just being able to go A plus B equals C at a very complicated level. Because sometimes it's A plus B equals C, and sometimes it's A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And the equations get more complicated.
And being able to have a conversation that is less about winning and more about representing the truth well.
Yeah.
And I think that would, because then it becomes, like you said, I think that's what opens up to more like these podcasters and people being more open. It's not because people went in there and said, listen, you're going to hell, which may be true if they're not, if they're not believers, but it's people going in well equipped to answer those questions and to present it, not trying, and this sounds wrong, but not trying to convert them in that moment, but to say, the Lord has opened up this opportunity. I'm going to go do my part and share the truth and trust that He's using that to do something, rather than me trying to go in and make all this change at once out of my own strength.
That's good, man. You got some hate takeaways for us?
I do, but the first thing I have to say is every time you kept saying the word platitude, all I could think of was, man, if David Platt had a podcast, that'd be a great name. Platitudes.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's really good.
I digress. All right, Hayes takeaways for today. Number 1, instead of voting for the lesser of two evils, vote with wisdom and discernment for the administration who most closely aligns to biblical values rather than the person and is likely to do the most good. Do that instead of making it about the actual candidates running. Number 2, no matter what the outcome, there will be a lot of division and outrage by half the country in a couple weeks. So be sure that you are representing Christ well. Stay humble if your candidate wins, and stay peaceful and speak cautiously if your candidate does not win. We should be peacemakers and unifiers and not contribute to more division or turmoil. And then number 3, vote. Again, you are welcome to vote for whomever you want, even though we are very specific when we say who we think you should vote for and why. But it is your right. And it's your right not to vote, but we highly encourage you to go cast a vote as best you can according to the wisdom and knowledge through the Lord, through the scriptures. And if you could make that vote for Trump, that'd be great.
That's a heck of a way to end, man. Right. Well, we appreciate you guys for listening, and we are trying to make much of the Lord Jesus and our worldview in the public square, thus theology in the dirt. So we hope you're challenged. We hope we've made you think a little bit, and we hope we've given you some things to go try to figure out. But in the end, we want Jesus to be exalted. We want God's word to be a lamp for your feet and light for your path, as we're trying to do that ourselves. And so if you want more, you can go find all that stuff at theologyinthedirt.com. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, a host of other podcast platforms. We'd love it if you'd share the podcast. We'd love it if you give it a 5-star rating, leave a comment. It's on YouTube also, all that good stuff. But even more importantly, if you attend Three Rivers Church, we want to help provide content for you to help you think and be in the public square well, as we seek to make disciples of all nations by producing radical followers of Jesus Christ. And so we hope you'll take this content, use it, share it, and to whatever degree it helps advance the kingdom, win. If you have questions, comments, things you want us to talk about, send it to theologyinthedirt at gmail.com, and we'll get it and deal with it. Thanks, y'all. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Out.